refer to. I'll talk to you more about work.
Yeah.
Yes. I think I came in mainly to tell us terrific about the
Okay, take your seat. We're about to get started.
Can maybe grab the microphone?
Oh, Carrie, sorry, we're about to get started.
Yes. That looks good.
Is it picking me up?
Very good.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no.
Okay, testing. All right, hello everyone, and thank you for attending Tree Doctors, our exciting hybrid event. So those of you on Zoom, there's some of us here in person, and vice versa. We have an even larger crowd signed up for Zoom actually, but I think you people who showed up in person are our special guests for this evening.
Thank you.
My name is Kate Jakevich. I'm the Executive Director of the Greenwich Tree Conservancy. We're a donation-funded nonprofit in a public-private partnership with the town of Greenwich. We plant, preserve, and protect trees together with members of the town of Greenwich, like Dr. Greg Kramer, who will be introduced here in just a minute. And as also part of this mission, we really aim to do a lot of educational events as well. So we're very happy to have you with us here tonight to learn a little bit more about trees and how to take care of them. I'm going to be sitting down for most of this, so I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mark Greenwald. Mark Greenwald is a founding member of the Greenwich Tree Conservancy, as well as a co-owner of Mayer and Greenwald Incorporated. He received his master's in urban planning from the City College of New York and has decades of experience in landscape and garden design. His designs have been featured locally and nationally, and he's received many local and national awards as well. We're very lucky to have such an expert with us here tonight, as well as on the Greenwich Tree Conservancy Board. So I'm going to now pass it off to Mark to introduce our speakers.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for such a sterling introduction, Kate. Belies the true me. Who's just basically a tree hugger who loves to design trees and have fun on the landscape. Let me introduce our panelists. We're going to be speaking about a variety of topics tonight, and we have a number of questions that audience members have already sent in, and we'll be entertaining questions from the audience that's live here with us tonight. So thank you all for coming. And the panelists, we have a few questions that the panelists themselves have brought up that we will try to get to, and I might have a few of my own to throw out. But first, directly to my right is Dr. Gregory Kramer, who is currently the Superintendent of Parks and Trees and the Tree Warden for the town of Greenwich here. Prior to his tenure for the town, Greg was the Director of Horticulture at Bach Tower Gardens for 7 years in Florida, correct? Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Kramer has over 25 years of professional experience working in the horticulture industry. He holds a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Miami, a master's in horticultural science, and a doctoral degree in plant medicine, both from the University of Florida. We're happy to have him up here in the north now, bringing new info and trees to us along with climate change. To his right, we have John R. Conti, who's the owner and principal landscape architect of Conti & Conti, right here in Greenwich. In addition to being a registered landscape architect in Connecticut and New York, John is also a Connecticut licensed arborist. As an active and very involved community member here, John has served on the boards of the Greenwich Land Trust, Greenwich Audubon, Greenwich Green and Clean for many, many years, the Round Hill Association, and currently he's president, as Kate mentioned, of the board of our very own Greenwich Tree Conservancy. So I'd like to say welcome aboard, John, and it's great to have you at the beginning of your tenure sitting on a panel here. John is also on the governmental side of things here in Greenwich, been the vice chair of the Town of Greenwich Architectural Review Committee has served in the Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Agency and also the Selectmen's Green Committee, which is currently administering and running a project to, which John can tell you more about later, to plant a whole lot of new trees all along Route 1 corridor here in Greenwich. And now, our third panelist, to John's right, is Alan Fenner, consulting advisor who works for Bartlett Tree Experts. Alan grew up in Rhode Island and credits his love of trees and the outdoors to his parents, who loved taking the family camping and hiking. He currently lives in Connecticut and recently joined the Bartlett Consulting Advisory Team after many years of experience in the field as an arborist. Alan has BS in Natural Resource Management and Forestry from the University of Rhode Island and an MS in Education from Central Connecticut State. Over the course of his career, he specialized in tree preservation planning for the built environment. He's been serving as a board member for the Connecticut Tree Protective Association since 2007 and as president of that association in 2019 and 20. So I think we have a great group here to answer your questions and give out some fun and important information to our guests here, as well as to those who are calling in. We're going to try to stay focused on three main areas tonight. One within which many of the questions that have been asked will fall. One of them is species selection, including the impact of climate change on our species selection and the impact of climate change on the maintenance of our trees these days. We're going to try to touch on natives versus cultivars in that area as well. And just talk about great trees to plant and different places in which people can plant them. The next area is we're going to try to touch on, which is important to everybody, is the protection of our trees. Protection both from man. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, as well as from nature. And that's what most people think of these days, but from storms and flooding, from invasive vines, from all sorts of things. But both nature and man can have quite an impact on our trees. And thirdly, we will just touch from here and there on planting and maintenance and a lot of how-to things, how you can take care of your trees, what's important, and how to speak to the people that you hire to take care of and select and design trees and things for you as well. Not everybody does everything themselves, so it's really important to know how to speak to people, get the right information, ask the right questions, and here are the people that you can start asking the right questions. So let me just start off by throwing this out to all of you who'd like to say a couple words about the impact of climate change on our tree species here, and both our selection, planting, and maintenance.
Okay, sure. Let me talk about that. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that introduction. So yes, talking a little bit about climate change and the effects it has on our plant species. There's, without question, things are getting warmer, and with warmer temperatures come an array of different challenges. Those being frequent rainstorms, infrequent rainstorms, heat and drought. So we need to think ahead in terms of plant migration and how that affects the environment. Plants really can't migrate like they used to back in the time humans didn't monopolize half the East Coast. So for a plant to get from point A to point B is much more difficult There was a time where migration was a very slow process, but it happened. The climate's changing much more rapidly than any plant could possibly migrate. So as stewards of this planet, it had started as a very controversial type of forest management, but I think it's becoming more commonly understood that us as stewards of this planet have to look at, what species we are losing in terms of the very locale, and what species could replace that species as it tries to migrate north, and the southern species migrate north in its place. So keeping that in mind, and being partially responsible for a lot of the properties in Greenwich, public properties, we're doing our part in terms of adding species that maybe would be a little bit further south to our composition of oaks. We're looking at different varieties of oaks that handle the drought much more better, the heat much more better, still benefit the wildlife. Also, as we're losing some of our local species, the maples in general, sugar maples are stressing out. We want to be certain that a native species is taking up that vacuum. It's not an invasive species, because if we don't move quickly and fill these gaps, unfortunately, it's invasive species that usually take over. And that's not only due only to climate, but it's also due to the high population of deer that prefer native species over invasive species. So there are many challenges when we're thinking about species in terms of climate change. So those are some of our thoughts, some of our practices here. I don't know if anybody else has anything they'd like to add.
Yeah, just one of the ones that I find is most heartbreaking is seeing all the sugar maples dying back. And they just, they're what makes fall color in our part of the country. And so many of them, you'll notice there's chip dieback, and there's a lot of dead twigs in them. And that really is, unfortunately, a visible sign of the fact that they're now at their southern edge of their comfort zone. So, as a landscape architect, there's different types of forests. There's the national forest, there's the local urban forest, and then there's home landscapes. And as a landscape architect, I mostly focus on residential landscapes, which have the benefit of, usually a very caring homeowner that can address tree problems. They can water during some of the stress times for plants. They can make sure that they're properly mulched. They can address disease or insects. The state forests, when something like an insect problem comes along, hemlock adelgid or something, that starts sweeping through, it's very difficult to treat thousands of trees. But as homeowners here, and as people focused on smaller plots of land, we can address many of the tree problems that you see. So I'm drifting off the climate change topic, but there's challenges. There's also beautiful southern magnolia growing near my house now that I planted and is doing well. So it's pretty to see that tree, but the sugar maples are dying off. So, the planet has never been unchanging, and so the trees will adapt. I think Greg makes a great point that trying to bring in natives again. And, one of the simplest questions to ask is, well, why is it so important to use plants? Because there was such a huge trend in plant cultivation and collecting from all over the world. But the simple fact is that so many other life forms depend on feeding on trees. And when there are foreign species, the insects don't know what to do with it, the birds don't know what to do with them. There's one really sad fact about these carpet roses that got super, super popular. When my wife told me this, because she's really into horticulture also and follows all this, but these carpet roses that are very floriferous and constantly in bloom all summer long have absolutely nothing for the bees. And the poor bees will exhaust themselves on these roses looking for pollen, something, and they just they think it should be there, and so they just spend their whole day trying to get pollen off of something that's not there. So that's why planting natives is so super important, because the insects, the birds, and then all the other animals in the food chain really rely on the native species.
John, let me stay with that topic for a second and bring up another species. You mentioned the sugar maples and the difficulty that they're having because of changing climate. We, in this area, used to be some close to the northern extent of the zone of the beech trees that are very, very, very constant presence in our forests, as well as the native areas left on people's properties around here, and on the properties as well, both cultivated and native. But can you or Alan, Greg, speak a little bit about the what's happening to our beech trees? How do we deal with them? How do we protect them? Are they becoming more vulnerable as climate warms up a little bit? And and how do people deal with them in terms of the beech leaf disease, which is just a couple of years.
I think this is a great question for Greg,
old.
for
Yeah.
Alan.
Yeah. Do they have to just cut them down, or is there anything on the horizon that can save them?
Well, that was a very well-loaded question you asked there. And I'm going to go back a little bit in there where you said you started with maples and their decline. And it's important to remember, that climate change or climate disruption is affecting native species, okay? But let's remember, though, that sugar maple is a forest species, okay, from its original ecology. We moved it into a landscape environment and grew them very much in a landscape environment, put them in a lot of, subjected them to a lot of man-made alterations of their original environment. So they've basically been trying to adapt to that long before, we saw the initial, breakdown or their decline. It's the same with any other native species where they were native in a forest environment, beech as well. John mentioned it's important that we choose native species for a reason. And one of those main reasons is that they're so adapted to the natural environment and adapted to the natural predators and insects that take care of that. A lot of the problems that I see in the sugar maples, and I'll get to the beech in a minute, is that because we put them in that man-made environment and we put other stresses on them that they're not used to in a forest situation, they have a harder time acclimating and bringing themselves into a full health condition. Of course, drought stress, insect stress, disease stress affects them all, but it's all part of that natural cycle. If we put that same species of tree in ideal conditions, there's a better chance of it acclimating and becoming just as beautiful as we want it to be. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be thinking about climate change and picking species that are adapted to that, because it is going to be getting warmer. But let's just remember, it's not something that happened overnight. It's something that has built up over time in terms of the stressors that they've been dealing with. Now, getting to your beech, unpacking it one at a time. Beech is another forest species that, a wonderful species that we just absolutely love, just like the sugar maple. And Most of us here are familiar with beech leaf disease as a more recent contributor to that list of things that impact that tree. But remember, there's a whole list. I could probably knock off about 15 different things that attack or affect beech trees besides beech leaf disease. So when we're talking about, when we get a cold, if we're tired and we're run down, it's a lot harder for us to recover. It's the same with beech, in that when this insect or this, nematode that's affecting it with the disease that we refer to as beech leaf disease, the tree, if it were healthy, would be better able to prolong some of that or sustain itself. Right now, to speak directly to beech leaf disease, it's basically a threat that affects the ability of the tree to make food for itself, essentially, right? It's something that's directly in the buds. It's not in the soil getting into the tree. It's not in the bark. It's directly in the buds of the tree. And we all know beech buds, they look like a big spear, a very pointed spear. And they're feeding over winter, they're overwintering in those buds. And the damage is being caused while they're in the bud. Okay, and then that, as the tree expresses or foliates, we get to see some of the impact of that. There are treatments for it, and we recently learned that through extensive research that we can effectively treat BLD, but it's something that we're going to have to get used to. Looking at this particular treatment as not necessarily a eradication treatment. It's not going to get rid of the BLD in one treatment. It's something that will slowly allow the tree to acclimate back to a natural response. So I'm not sure if I unpacked everything that you said, Mark, but
So that's a nematode spray?
It's a treatment. It's a foliar treatment. We use broad form is the product that we use, and
Time of year.
Reliant.
and Reliant is the other product that we use with it. Thank you. I have a friend in the audience
The
here.
audience is stacked.
That's right. So it's a combination of foliar and spray treatment.
I think in layman's terms, Alan, what you've just been explaining is that there are products available to help with these new diseases, particularly the beech trees that you were speaking about, which they don't cure the disease, but they're giving the trees a chance to, to cure themselves, to get stronger again. It's medicine, in other words, and the sprays, and they do have to go on for years sometimes, but it enables the tree to slowly get its vigor back to the point where something that's trying to attack it just kind of goes away. And it's true with the beech trees. It's true with a lot of plants, that we all have to deal with. And it's one of the things that we try to explain to and educate homeowners, on how to deal with them, how to deal with people, to help deal with them as well. Or if they're going out to the hardware store and asking, what can I do for this?
Can I ask you a question about getting back to the sugar maple? Because there's a lot of cultivars, a lot of varieties out there now, and I know that a lot of nurseries were hybridizing to try to encourage people to grow sugar maples up here again. that are maybe hardier, will respond a little bit better to the home landscape? Have you found that? Because now some of these like Green Mountain and, I don't know, Autumn Blaze or some of the other ones are, you know.
Yeah, the cultivar world is amazing, and the nurserymen, God bless them, are just constantly, creating and adapting and coming out with new varieties that often have strengthened characteristics. So definitely look for that. I think there's probably some science to, at what point a plant has been cultivated beyond its ability to serve its natural role, but not, I don't think, immediately that's true. When Alan was talking about the sugar maples as a forest species that's used in our landscape, it immediately made me also think of our beloved flowering dogwoods, which are also understory trees, happiest in the shade of a forest, and are often put front and center in the middle of a lawn, and then wonder why they're struggling. They really do not like drought. One of the first articles I ever had, I think, put in the paper as an arborist was probably almost 40 years ago, and it was about dogwoods. I'll never forget the ridiculous headline the editor put on it, because it was, I tried to make a serious article about why dogwoods are struggling in drought and what to do about it, and that there was a drought apparently back in the 80s that killed off a lot of dogwoods. And the headline was something like, "Trouble dogging dogwoods over." And I was like, what does that mean? But anyway, they were trying to say that once the drought is passed, and I've always said, don't stop planting dogwoods. They're a wonderful tree. They are native. Just give them a little bit of shade. And as Alan was saying, and I think it also goes to the point I was making before, that with beech trees or things like that, we have the advantage in our home landscapes of giving them that extra care. It's the forested areas, and I really large land trust property behind where I live, and you could just see the sunlight coming through into those woods that was not normally there because of the dozens of beech trees that were defoliated. So that's going to change the forest because that sun will bring up, the species that replace, which often are birch and maple. So hopefully we, as with the hemlocks, we were fearful that they were all going to be gone, and then they rebounded, and luckily there's still hemlocks in the woods, and hopeful that there will still be beech trees. Ash, on the other hand, are getting rarer and rarer. Ash decline, which I don't know if maybe Dr. Kramer or Alan could describe in more detail, but that has eliminated almost all the ash trees. I was on a project a few months back in the summer, I think it was in the Stanwich Club, and I remember looking from a distance at this spectacular, beautiful, big tree in fall color, and I almost didn't recognize, I was like, I was far away from it, what is that beautiful tree? And it was an ash, but they're so rare now, and you just don't see them in that glory. I'm not sure why that one is doing so well, but we should go collect seedlings from underneath it. I have no idea where our question was, but.
Well, let me bring on to something related. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, just to circle back on sugar maple, there is a southern species of sugar maple that universities and nurserymen are doing research on, which they're looking to replace the northern species of sugar maple.
And which one is that?
But they changed the name. It used to be Florida, Ace of Florida, but I think it starts with a B now. I'm not exactly sure what the name is, but just wanted to throw that out there that there is a southern species of sugar maple that takes the heat and better urban conditions.
Can you make maple syrup with it?
I don't know. Yes, Russell.
The town has some old beech trees, though, like near Greenwich Avenue. What are you doing about that?
The beech trees that are on public lands that are significant, we're treating,
Oh, what do you do?
and they're responding.
What do you do? You spray them, feed them, we wrap their barks, what do you?
We do, well, they're root treated.
Yeah.
And, no, I'm not sure if they're foliar sprayed, but they're root treated.
Isn't spraying bad for insects and dogs and birds and all that stuff?
Well, it depends on what you're applying.
Is there a safe spray for beech trees?
Maybe I could talk a little bit more about that. I certainly aren't suggesting anybody spray a nematicide by any means.
That sounds bad.
Yes. So, but maybe Alan, you could maybe talk about that.
Well, I was gonna just mention, in regard to treatment of beech trees, right now, the treatment that we have is safe, actually. We actually found out through research that where they'd set up these test plots, they found that they set up different levels of treatment on trees side by side, so you can see the efficacy there. And they found that with less of the treatment, the trees would respond just as much to reducing the amount of nematodes in the, in the beech leaf. So we actually found a way to use less pesticide to treat that's just as effective as using a higher dosage. So, and that's what's being recommended right now, right? And
What's the timing for treatment?
There's a diagram that we can bring up later.
Treatment is usually done in, remember, it's when the insect or the nematode becomes active, and we basically want to keep it from doing that damage when it's in the bud, right? So we want to affect the amount of those prior to getting in the bud, or just as they're where we can get at them, right? So we have a treat that starts it's in July.
It's, yeah, like end of June.
End of June, July, beginning of July, and then goes into the fall, where it's a successive treatment.
So as the tree is setting buds.
Yes. But that's the best treatment in Connecticut right now. But what I wanted to say was that in regard to forests and beech trees, it's not practical to use that on forest applications, just because of the amount, the cost, the relative vastness of where beech trees are in the forest. So we have to continue to research and find out what would be the best way to treat this invasive pest. So I don't think I addressed your question too much.
There's a question in the audience. Yes.
I have a question about BLT also. Everything that I read said that it was species specific for all species of beech trees. However, I've taken care of plants that have been over the years, and there are ficus trees that are introduced that need to be put out to clean up from the scale. This past year, those ficuses went out there and they did not recover, they did not look healthy, and they exhibited that beech leaf, the symptoms, the same symptoms as the beech leaves.
Similar.
Very similar, right.
Not the
Could it
same.
be because it's a tropical species that it was vulnerable to this disease?
It's not beech leaf disease that you're looking at in ficus. Okay, it's beech leaf disease is a nematode that affects beech trees, specific to beech. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what was affecting your ficus, but they do have similar. When the leaves fall and drop, there's a similar symptom, right? So I'd have to kind of see before I say a diagnosis for your ficus tree, but I can tell you that it's not BLD affecting your ficus. similar, but not the same.
Okay, thank you.
So there are a lot of pests or even frost that can affect a bud when it's in bud form, and then when those leaves unfurl, they look crumpled and curled up.
John?
Yeah, it was very sensitive to.
Okay, the statement that John just made leads us into a question from the audience, related topic. The question is, what's a disease-resistant evergreen for screening? Now, just thinking about that, it has some impact on the fact that what typical that we've used for years and years, for decades, for generations, for screening our houses from neighbors, from the street and so forth, where people are beginning to find that they're not doing the job quite as well as they used to, some of them. Some of them are not even as available as they used to be. But nowadays, two of the more commonly used evergreens that people screen with are rhododendrons, and especially around here in this region, in this area, in the last half dozen years, are another broadleaf evergreen that we call cherry laurels, or the tall ones, which we affectionately call skips. So much so that in the last several years there have been runs on these things. The landscapers, nurseries, designers couldn't get their hands on enough of them because everybody wanted them, because they're disease resistant, they're deer resistant, they can take some shade, and so forth and so on. It was this magic plant. Well, it turns out they're not so as much magic as people anticipated they would be, because with the changing climate and the preponderance of winters where the temperatures go up and down, a lot of freeze-thaw cycles, particularly this past winter, and the drought that we had last year. Right now, just in the last 2 weeks, we've been fielding a lot of calls from people who are saying, my cherry laurels, my rhodos that look beautiful all winter are just drooping and drying up. What can I do about them? This may very well be an extended symptom of the extreme drought we had last year, combined with some late freeze-thaw cycles. And I think we can expect this sort of thing to be happening more and more. So what do you guys, what do my panelists here have to say about this in terms of climate change and in terms of usage of some of the evergreen materials for screening, for just planting around the house?
Okay, so Mark, what you described are broadleaf evergreens, what we call broadleaf evergreens, skip laurels, rhododendrons, mountain laurels, and they are susceptible to the winter's harshness because they have this big exposed leaf surface all winter long. And so salt spray or a late frost or a drought can cause that large leaf surface to shrivel up or to turn brown or to scorch, which is what we see on the skip laurel so often. But when you talk about screening, to try to answer the question from the audience, screening can mean a lot of different things. 4 feet high, 6 feet high, 8 feet high, 10 feet high, 20 feet high. So sometimes when someone wants to do screening, they want to block out an entire house. And so then you're not talking about broadleaf evergreens, you're talking about big trees like spruces, cryptomeria, or one of my favorite used to be hemlock, but as Mark was saying, you can't find them commercially. It's very, very difficult because they got all bought up. A lot of them, during the Adelgid crisis, the nurseries stopped growing them. It's really hard to find hemlock. And what was so wonderful about hemlock is that they're native and they're soft and they just sort of recede into the background. We've all seen screening with arborvitaes that look like a series of soldiers standing up, and that's not very native. I mean, it kind of fits in a suburban landscape where it's really just no different than a fence. I think the arborvitaes are pretty disease resistant. One of the ones that we see an awful lot of are called green giants, and they're named that for a good reason. And they're very inexpensive because they grow so fast. So you could get a 6 or 8 foot tall plant, at the nursery for $100 or so. But they'll grow 2 feet a year or more, and they grow wide and tall. So they just quickly become inappropriate in a lot of spaces unless you're planting them knowing that there's a lot of room to go. So those green giants, beware. They're inexpensive, but they become giants. So some of my favorite ways to screen is not with a monoculture, but to mix it up with some of the varieties I just described. White spruce is a wonderful native alternative to the ubiquitous Norway spruce that we all see so much of. And there are blue spruce. Sometimes I like to intersperse deciduous trees so it doesn't look like a Christmas tree farm. When you're trying to screen, you add a red maple, add some birch trees. Birch is another one that maybe was overused, but the river birch, which is really, really tough tree and inexpensive because they grow so fast. But sometimes it makes me feel old when I look at a tree that I planted at 60 feet tall. And these things really, really do grow fast. But mixing, so depending on the setting, the answer isn't necessarily just pick one species that's disease resistant and put 50 of them in a row. And we've all seen that, and I think it's a terrible look. And it's also not going to give you the best hedge against, didn't mean that as a pun, but the best hedge against disease, because the problem with monocultures, as I'm sure most of you know, is that one plant gets a disease or insect that attacks it, it can just run down the whole row. So by mixing up the species, you not only get a more natural look, but you get a more defensible and a more sustainable look.
And let me say that more and more municipalities around the country have been changing their design palettes from their tree departments, their public works departments, to go from planting what John characterized as monocultures to creating more diversity. Instead of having the old American Main Street full of elm trees, all the way down the street, although it might have looked very good, at a certain point it didn't work anymore. So more and more places, and Greg the chair amongst them, and Greg can speak more to that because Greg is our chief public planner and designer now, are going to mixing tree species up on streets in city centers.
Yeah, the danger, as John was saying about a monoculture, is get a disease and it blows through the whole area, kills all the trees or all the plants, which is actually even more scary. Taking it even to a further degree is a lot of these plants, particularly green giants, are all cultivated cultivars of themselves, so they're genetically similar. Whereas at least back in the day, there was diversity in terms of street tree plantings. This tree may come from one place, this one may come from another place. But green giants are all cuttings from green giants, from green giants, from green giants. I don't know how many generations of the same green giants that are out there. So it's pretty scary to think if a disease came through here, how it would impact the landscape. So to talk about diversity, it is very important. When we do a lot of restoration, we take a lot of things into consideration. Certainly diversity in terms of tree species, but also diversifying families. So if there is a problem particular to, let's say, one family of trees, say the maples, We have some oaks in there to kind of, make up that space, or something really far off and, a different family altogether, like sassafras, which is in the laurel family. So we don't have these sweeps of diseases that go through. Just kind of talking a little about diseases, it comes with a lot of factors and being, what the conditions are like. So I think choosing the right tree, knowing the right tree to put in the right place will help mitigate any future diseases, or at least minimize future diseases.
You actually said everything I was going to say, but I want to ask, I want to basically just put forward, though, it's not only diseases, there are insect threats, okay, and we have a lot of invasive insects that also affect us. Sometimes we often refer, oh, what disease is affecting my ash? Well, it's not a disease, it's an insect, right? So the important thing, though, is that with both diseases and insects, they are acclimated to be able to determine in the landscape where the stressed plants are. Okay, so they have that, that vision, so to speak, to be able to single out the ash trees that are being impacted or that are stressed, or the beech trees that are, maybe have beech bark disease and are a little less adept at fighting off other types of threats. So they're more apt to be attacking those. So what that says is that if we maintain, or we try to maintain, an environment that is stress-free, there's more likelihood that the trees are going to recover. And there's more likelihood that we're going to use less pesticides, and we're going to use less, chemicals to be able to support that. So, think of the native, or the natural cultural practices that can improve that environment for those trees and shrubs.
Alan, we have thank you. I'm going to give this back to you in a second, but we have a question which was sent to us from Leslie Petrick, who says, is pruning my Bosque pear tree down by 6 feet too severe? And she says, it's about 15 feet tall now. Now, it's an interesting question, and it's a lead-in to what you all were just talking about the stresses that get put onto trees. Now, we've been talking mostly about natural stresses, from climate, from insects and so forth. Well, the other side of that are the stresses that man puts, that humans put on the trees by bad
Cutting a tree in half.
or cutting, mulching, feeding, irrigation, trimming, and so forth. Tell Leslie what you can do with her Bosque pear, and then speak about, what we can or should avoid doing to our trees to cause them too much stress and give them the best chance to survive.
Yes.
So I'm not familiar with that specific variety of pear. However, if it's a fruit producer and that it's on your property to produce fruit, you're probably aware that not only with pears and with apples, orchardists prune those trees to be accessible and harvestable, and develop those shapes that were close to the ground and so on and so forth. If we let it go natural, okay, for instance, and attain 15 feet, harvesting is going to be a little more difficult. So to answer the question in terms of if I cut 6 feet off my 15-foot tree, is that drastic? Well, it could be. It depends upon how much foliage is there and what the structure is of that tree. Can it be structurally pruned to adapt to how you want to harvest that tree. But typically, in a pruning situation in a healthy tree, we try to avoid going more than, I know the BMP says 25% in a healthy tree. I usually recommend less than 25%, usually 20%, because contrary to popular belief, even though we think so, our tree is in excellent condition. It's probably not in excellent condition. It's probably in good condition. And there are some things that could improve that condition. So stressing it by removing an awful lot of the foliage that produces its food is not going to be keeping it in a good condition. So we have to be careful with the amount that we remove in that situation. John is just waiting to say something.
I want to use this opportunity to really maybe disseminate some information about pruning because it is so important. And I mean, if you drive by an orchard and you see the trees all look like umbrellas, because of just what Alan said, is you want the branches to come down and so they don't snap with the weight of the fruit and that they're accessible. But also, you know, I think in apple trees or fruit trees, sometimes a sucker, as we call them, or a water sprout, can just shoot off in one direction and be 6 or 7 feet tall. And if it's a well-formed, mature tree that's been pruned for years and has been kept, you know, I mean, that could be a trunk that's 8 inches or more in diameter, or it could just be a little sapling that only has 5 or 6 branches. So it's impossible to really answer a question like that. But what's important is to give the tree its canopy. One of the things that'll cause what's called scalding in a fruit tree is when you take too many of the leaves off the top, and especially if you do that in the summer before the tree has any chance to adapt, suddenly there's this intense sunlight on the thin bark on the top, and you'll see it cracking and opening up from that kind of thing. But while we're on the subject of pruning, I also wanted to just point out, there's not enough time to really get into the detail here, but when you're pruning, you want to look for something called the branch collar and not cut that, because trees don't heal, they encapsulate, right? They don't heal, they seal. Okay, good, didn't have that pun in there. And so when you see a cut, they will slowly, year after year, the callus growth comes around that wound until, and the tree is subjected to rot from that wound until such time, if they ever get there, that callus growth touches, and then that's when the rot stops. This is from college a long time ago. Is this still current information?
You're very close.
Okay, I mean, back when I started tree cut, I mean, you wanted to make a flush cut, right? And that was right close to the bark, and you took a lot of pride in getting it so that it was the shape of the trunk, and you were cutting off the branch collar, which was setting the tree back years, if not ever, to be able to heal that. So there's a little wrinkly part around a branch called the collar. Don't ever cut that off, even if it leaves a little angled bump. And that's what I wanted to tell you about pruning.
John,
Yeah.
we have a question from Mary Julian related. She says, I have heard that you should not prune an oak tree except while dormant. Is that correct? And can you explain why? So perhaps you can just talk a little bit about timing of pruning for trees overall for the audience.
The same goes with bears.
And different species that you can prune at different times.
Yeah. One of you guys, doctors, want to talk about that?
I'm assuming that thought might be because of oak diseases that they could get. If you don't have to prune during the summer, I would suggest not pruning during the summer. It would be best during the dormant season for those various reasons.
It probably has to do with what I just said too, that when you take off branches, if the tree is spent all spring putting its energy into new leaves and new branches, or any adventitious growth that you see, it's using energy, right? So to put it into those leaves. And then we come by and we prune off those branches. And we've just eliminated all the sources of food production to restore that energy that is used in that capability. So the best time to prune would be prior to the tree putting that energy into forcing the buds. So you can do some pruning on certain trees, especially if they're disease prone, where the disease is more available during the growing season. If we prune them in the late spring, before the buds are supple and all that energy has been put to put the sap into those buds, then that's better because the tree hasn't exerted that energy to grow those leaves out into that foliage. And, then we come over with our, we just want to remove that branch and this branch. And before you know it, you've removed that 20%. And now the tree is less capable of putting more resources back into storage. So that's another reason.
Can you just be specific a little bit? Because I went out just last week, like 2 days ago, and I noticed that little tiny leaves are coming out on almost all my trees now. Is that still dormant? I mean, did I miss my moment, or if we gotta wait till next year? Is it still dormant?
If there are leaves that are actually.
It's like I can see the little green popping through the bud, like the bud.
So the buds are already swelled and they're starting to turn, so
I mean,
it depends on the
not
species
every
of the
type
tree.
Yeah.
It'll depend on the species of the tree, but for instance, I always recommend pruning elm trees that are susceptible to Dutch elm disease in the wintertime when there's less chance of that bark beetle coming and going to those fresh wounds and proliferating.
So it would
that
be
disease.
too late in a case like that.
But if your buds are already unfurled, if there's certain aspects of your tree that need pruning, prune them. If there's a branch that's cracked from the winter, or there's something that's broken or unsightly, that needs to be removed, or you need to elevate it. We're only talking about 1 or 2 branches, and those are branches usually, if we're elevating that stem. Those were temporary branches anyway. And, 1 or 2 branches is not going to make a difference in terms of the amount of food that's going to be lost. But if we're talking about losing a major limb or something to that regard to the tree in height, that's significant, and that's going to cause, a stress condition.
Thanks.
Can you be deep pruned, and is now a good time to do it?
Taxus? You mean deer's favorite food?
Really?
Not your house? Okay.
Which is also not good for them.
Yeah, well, I hope they find that out. But taxus I've found responds to pruning almost any time. But it depends on the health condition of the tree or the shrub in this case.
So I think physiologically, talking about best time to prune evergreens, Alan, can correct me if I'm wrong on this too, but you want to prune them right after their spring growth, before they set their buds for the next year, if your objective is to make them fuller, right? So to make it smaller. Yeah, so to make an evergreen smaller, you've only got so much of a window to do that, right? You don't want to come back down below the foliage. So there might be just 12 inches of foliage at the end of the branches. That's all you have to work with. But what I was referring to is a lot of times people want to have their hedges look nice and full. And so after that first push of growth in June, usually it's done, you trim off those new shoots, and then the tree will set buds on what you're leaving behind, and so it'll be fuller. Another really cool thing is about the terminal bud, which has a hormone that actually controls and slows the growth of all the side buds, so that a tree can find the sky fastest, right? So all the terminal buds, when you think of a spruce tree, for example, a Christmas tree, right? You cut off those terminal buds, that whole growth hormone is gone, that regulates the side shoots, and the side shoots will get bigger. Am I right about that?
You're talking about apical dominance, yeah. So.
If he said apical dominance, would you guys know what he was talking about? But you understood it the way I said it, right?
You're always right.
All right, what's next?
Okay, let's just stay with the, the planting and maintenance of trees for a minute. I have a question here. I have a still young Boss Coupe apple in my yard, planted 4 years ago, that started to have a lot of apples last year, but midsummer lost all the apples and leaves prematurely. I assume this to be a weather-related making, and the tree more susceptible to a fungus.
Where's the nearest cedar tree?
Yeah. Will the tree recover, and what can I do to prevent it? What nutrients should be added, like magnesium, etc.? What natural ways are there to protect trees? Anybody want to take that one? And then I'd like to pass it over to Greg and ask him to speak a little bit about the whole notion of mycorrhizae and how that feeds into both planting and the maintenance of plants and trees themselves.
The real magic. All right, so we're talking about apple tree. Why the apples all fell off.
Boss Coupe apple.
So I'm not going to speak directly to that cultivar or species, but one thing that was drilled into my head as an undergraduate and a graduate was prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. Okay, so it would be wrong for me to recommend a prescription for that or to even try to diagnose it without some more information. But apple trees, whether they're fruit producing or they're crab apples, any fruit producing tree is going to be susceptible to many fungal pathogens. I think I heard John mention, is there a cedar tree somewhere nearby? There are several different diseases that are only on a plant for half its cycle, and then they're on another plant for the other half of its cycle. So I'm not sure what specifically is affecting her tree. It could be a number of foliar diseases. It could be an environmental condition. It could be, it sounds as though that she takes care of her tree, so it's not likely a cultural condition in terms of water or anything of that nature. But we've got to think of, what else is around. And there is a very easy way to get your plants diagnosed if there is a problem. We have, first in the nation, we have the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, which will diagnose a plant sample from that tree free of charge. All you have to do is mail it there. There are instructions online on how to do that. And they will get an answer to you usually back within 10 days of if you follow the procedures on how to send the sample. So get a proper diagnosis, and then the right treatment can be recommended.
You don't have to mail the whole tree.
Greg, what are mycorrhizae? Mycorrhizae.
What she said.
I say it every day.
Well, I just wanted the opportunity to talk a little bit about mycorrhizae because it comes up very often in different lecture series and comments and questions throughout the years, actually. So mycorrhizae are fungi that live in the soil, saprophytically and also communally. And there's a lot of studies out there about mycorrhizae and how they benefit woody trees. So when you're developing a landscape, particularly a landscape from beginning, so let's say it's a new construction and the soil's been greatly disturbed, the addition of mycorrhizae could really help your plantings. But, what I'd like to just kind of put out there, and we can certainly talk more about it if people have questions, is, ask the question, is it the right mycorrhizae that's being added? And, what is the mycorrhizae that's being added? And right, there's all different kinds. And, if you're looking to inoculate your soil with mycorrhizae that help benefit the trees, and maybe I'll step back and kind of explain how they benefit. They develop a relationship where the mycorrhizae attaches to the root hairs. The root hairs provide the sugars, the mycorrhizae help provide the nutrients. And it's sort of this extended chain of the tree that extends further into the environment. So there's this exchange relationship that both benefit. So it's a mutual relationship. But my feeling is if you just went into the woods and collected natural native soil and inoculated your soil that way, you're using the local beneficial mycorrhizae as opposed to a commercialized one. That may not be what you actually need. It may not be what you actually want. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that there is mycorrhizae out in the environment. It's just you have to find it and you can use it to your benefit.
Well, now there are a lot of commercial products, and which people who are planting trees use when they're planting trees and shrubs to basically to help the new root system of the tree begin to grow, so that the tree or the shrub can also grow, and people, you guys can gentlemen can speak to this, but most people don't really think about the fact that when you buy or your landscaper or designer buys a tree for you, and you see this beautiful thing come in with this balled and burlapped, or if it's even in a large pot, 2/3 of the roots that were feeding the tree when it was growing in the field aren't there anymore. They've all been sheared off. Now, the tree is being fed every day in the nursery to keep it going, keep it alive. And it looks beautiful when it leaves the nursery and gets into your yard. But then it's on you. Then you have to start taking care of it. And what most people don't realize is that it does take several years, more in some cases, for that tree or that shrub to begin to grow back what got sheared off before it went to the nursery. And sometimes the trees look like they're not doing anything. Like they're just dormant, or like, did I get a dud? Did I buy a lemon? Why is it not growing? It takes time for that whole mix of stuff going on in the soil to reestablish itself, and the mycorrhizae that Greg is talking about is part of that mix.
Yeah, if there is any soil, right? So a lot of times you've just put on an addition or you've done some work and you're planting in what the contractor left, which might be less than desirable, and very doubtful that there's any mycorrhizae in that soil. So the plant's coming, it's been shocked, it's been dug, and you really have to think about the soil that it's being put in, which brings me to one of the conversations I wanted to cover, which is the stress on landscapes and trees in and around construction projects, because if Greenwich is popular for any one thing, it's construction. And a lot of times, big trees, which are known to be valuable, will be worked around, but not in necessarily a very smart way. A lot of times, the backyard becomes a parking lot for several months, and all the air is just pounded out of the soil, and the compaction that's left is really invisible to the homeowner, to the layperson. But those trees are basically doomed, and it could take 2, 3, 4, 5 years before they slowly decline, and then they look sick, and then the whole, everybody that was on the site during that process is long gone. So we know about the drip line around a tree, and when a construction project is happening, you want to protect at least to that point. I believe a big mature tree will have roots a third again beyond that drip line, so twice that. And all of the feeder roots for those trees are really in the top 18 inches of soil. So when these areas are used for parking or for storing heavy loads, that impact is really not reversible. So it's really one of the big challenges during construction, but I plead with the general public to know that if you've got valuable trees that you want there to be there for years after a construction project, employ someone like Alan or Bartlett or any consulting arborist to be present during the project. Make sure your landscape architect's plans have a tree protection page on that set, and that the contractors respect that during the process.
We probably got about 5 minutes.
Okay, all right.
Just quickly related to that, just to follow up on the contractors, John, I'm sure you see this all too often too. Other than construction, even if you're not doing a whole house, people often have masons rebuilding patios, walls, and such on their properties, and it behooves everybody to speak directly with their contractors and ask them to be careful. Don't, you can just be direct and say, please, don't park your trucks there.
Fences work better than asking.
Yeah, but one other thing that people don't really notice is that very often the guy cutting stones for your back patio picks his favorite tree, which is shady, to sit and cut the stones underneath. Now, that's fine, the stones don't hurt the tree. But the water that the guy has the hose constantly cooling his saw off does hurt the tree, because you'll have somebody sitting there for 2 hours a day for 6 straight days with the hose running.
Well, also, wet soil is much more
that tree's
compactable.
not going to recover from being drowned.
Wet soil is much more compactable also, and the pressure applied to the soil under the ball of a foot is actually more than a truck tire. So if there's 3-4 people working in that area for several weeks, yeah, a lot of compaction can be really just done by people.
And another thing that is related to construction impacts in soil, absolutely that masonry dumping of overflow or whatever is going to, that actual chemical in the cement or mortar is going to affect the soil condition and affect the trees. But in relation to what Greg and John said, the biggest thing in terms of the trees getting established in soils that may have been depleted or soils that have been around the trees for their entire time on your property, before you treat with a fertilizer or soil amendment, have the soil analyzed. And that's another thing that the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station does for nothing. They'll do a Morgan test for you for nothing, and it's described online how you can send a sample and they'll have that for you in a matter of a little over a week. And it gives you the recommendation based on your soil in terms of what it needs and for the type of plant material that you're growing. So use those resources. They're available to us. And our state has the best. I know down at the Ag Experiment Station, and they do an excellent job. So.
Could you talk about the lanternfly before you go away?
Okay, last topic.
How's the lanternfly?
Lanternfly, yes.
Did it get as bad as we were told, or?
I can say that a couple of things. One is we're removing its favorite host plant, Atlantis, whenever we see it. And I noticed last year it didn't seem to be as bad as the prior year. I know down in the Philadelphia area where it initially was introduced, they're already seeing a decline. And, insect introductions sometimes have this bell curve. And some areas it's still going up, and some areas, it's kind of plateaued and even going down. Will it be this kind of ubiquitous insect that's kind of here, but maybe not to the level it is now? Possible. We don't really know yet, but I do see a decline, and now that we removed the lantus trees. And I did hear again in Philadelphia, they're noticing a decline.
It's more of an agricultural concern with that pest than, I mean, everybody here, I can tell how much you love lantus trees. But, you know, if you're a grape grower or you're, you know, involved in some other agricultural host that is host to the spotted lanternfly, you're definitely concerned. But,
Possible quick on the dogwood disease,
sorry,
the dogwood disease that.
anthracnose?
Yeah.
Well, anthracnose has been here for a long time, and it's treatable, okay? And there's many conditions that can bring it about in our dogwoods. Drought is one of them, you know, even overwatering can bring it on, as well as other stresses. So I guess the best recommendation that I would say is to try to keep that environment for your dogwood. John mentioned early on, they happen to like shade, you know, and when we put them in a full sun condition, that's not something that they adapted very easily to. So there are some cultivars that do better in sunlight than, you know, partial shade, but it depends on the variety that you have. American dogwood is one of my favorites, so keeping it in an environment that keeps it happy is the best thing to keep it resistant to anthracnose. But it is treatable if you happen to notice the onset of it.
Is the treatment systemic?
There are systemic treatments. There are, and what are you guys using? Are you using the foliar treatment? Yeah, the quick acting ones are the foliar treatments.
Okay, well,
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you, and I think the biggest takeaway from this, for me, is to stay calm, get good advice, don't worry that the latest and the greatest insect infestation is going to kill everything on your property. We've seen it with the woolly adelgid. We're now seeing it with the lanternfly to some degree. There's a bell curve. They come, they go. Hang in there. Take care of your trees. And for Pete's sake, please don't cut down the big tree next to your house that you're worried is going to fall on your house.
Amen.
Get a few different sets of advice before you go ahead and do that, because chances are it's not. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
For our great